Hello, Staten Island. Welcome to the New York City Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative Listening Session. I'm Chief Juanita Holmes, Chief of Collaborative Policing. Let me begin by thanking each and every one of you for being here this evening. Your participation speaks volumes to your willingness and commitment to having your voice heard. I now would like to introduce our dais for the evening, starting with our Police Commissioner, the Honorable Dermot Shea, the President and CEO of New York Urban League, Arva Rice, the Commanding Officer of the First Deputy Commissioner's Office, Assistant Chief Matthew Pontello, the Commanding Officer of Patrol Bureau Staten Island, Assistant Chief Kenneth Corey, the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs, Edward Jackson, last and certainly not least, our distinguished facilitator for this evening's discussion, President and CEO of the historic Tappan Park Community Partnership and Youth Build Staten Island, Ms. Camilla Hanks. We will now hear from our Police Commissioner, the Honorable Dermot Shea.
Thank you, Juanita, and I will be brief. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I know how busy everyone's time, from our partners, facilitators, members of the NYPD, most importantly to you, community members, members of the public, members of civic organizations. I see our Staten Island District Attorney here, and to everyone at home. Tonight is the beginning of a process where we ask you questions, where we answer hard questions. It is my hope and it is my true desire that this process is a collaborative process between police and community. I've said it many times, that is exactly why we come to work every day. That is exactly who we work for. I think it's an opportunity where we listen to each other. It's an opportunity where we learn from each other. And hopefully along the way we also surprise each other. I want to thank everyone again for coming out tonight. It's the beginning of a process where we try to get to a place where, number one, we examine how we police New York City. How do we keep New York City streets safe for everyone? And how do we do it in the most equitable and fair way possible? Thank you, and I look forward to a spirited discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner. So why are we here this evening? This listening session is exactly what it says. This is your platform to be heard. We want to hear from you. This is an opportunity to tell us, how do we restore your trust? How do we restore your faith in your police department? The most important role that you will have this evening is the role of active participant. In order to create change, we need you to make recommendations and ask the tough questions, which you will do in the comments section on Facebook. Before our Q&A, allow me to give you a brief overview of where we are today. NYPD is ever evolving, especially in the area of strengthening community relations. In 2015, the New York City Police Department transitioned to neighborhood policing. We now have over 1,000 members of the service dedicated to that position in every precinct of New York City. Stronger relationships play a strong role in precision policing, helping us to focus on the small fraction of people responsible for the bulk of crime in New York City. Precision policing over the past decade has resulted in 49% fewer arrests being made and 83% fewer criminal court summonses being issued. Today in 2020, we continue to evolve as an agency to improve our product for the public. Starting with my office, Collaborative Policing, our mission is to find innovative ways to serve our community, improve access to services, enhance community, government, and advocacy relationships, design creative crime reduction strategies, increase the non-enforcement options available to our officers. Also in 2020, under the leadership of Police Commissioner Shea, The NYPD has renewed its commitment to proactively reaching young people and provide constructive engagement strategies, connecting them to resources and opportunities in their community. Understanding our communities is critical to serving our communities. So we encourage you to continue this dialogue by having your voice heard at your local precinct council and build-a-block meetings. To assist us in hearing your voice more clearly, the department has developed a customer service initiative that will be implemented citywide to provide you with an exceptional experience when visiting one of our facilities or interacting with our members. Additionally, as part of this program, we have developed a customer service survey, allowing you to share your experience so we can continue to improve. I have no doubt with this continued improvement, we will encourage all of our great minority communities in New York City to pursue a career with the New York City Police Department. I will now turn over the discussion to Assistant Chief Pontella.
Thank you, Chief Holmes. I'd just like to take a few minutes here to speak about some important innovations and strategies that the NYPD has embarked on over the last several years. This is by no means any type of mission accomplished statement, but rather this is where we are currently, what we're doing, and it's really designed to stress the idea that all of these innovations are brought on with the goal of seeking continuous improvement. A big part of that is training. We have expanded our training platform. We have gone from doing in-service training on average about 3 days a year to 10 or more. We've also launched an online distance learning platform. We've delivered over 100,000 hours of training through our online platform. And because every police officer now has a smartphone, we can deliver information and training right into the palm of their hands very, very quickly and easily. And some of these significant training programs that we've launched over the last few years include crisis intervention training to teach people, teach our officers how to deal with people in crisis, and also implicit bias training, investigative encounter training, and de-escalation training. Use of force. So perhaps the most critical decision that a police officer can ever make is to use force. It's something that we take very, very seriously in the department. At times, using force is necessary given the nature and the unpredictability of police work. However, through our training and our policies and our oversight, it's our goal to make the use of force as minimal and as infrequent as possible. To that end, we've launched a number of programs, including training, and in 2016 we revised our use of force policies to now include comprehensive data reporting and investigation of every use of force by a supervisor or an executive. This chart, I think, demonstrates some of the results of that commitment to reducing force. If you look back and you go to 1972, in 1972, there were 994 officer-involved shootings in New York City. And consider that in 1972, the city population was about 7 million, and the police force was much smaller. Compared to this year, we've had 29 total officer-involved shootings this year, and only 15 of those were adversarial, where a police officer was engaged with a civilian. The others were either accidental discharges or, unfortunately, a few suicides. And all of our use of force data is on our website. So for some time, we published an annual firearm discharge report, and over the last several years, we've published all this data that we've been collecting since 2016 on our website, so it is available for people to look at. So stop, question, and frisk. Look, we all know what a devastating impact this had upon the city and the relationships between the police and community. Over the last several years, we've been working to reduce stops and to focus on precision policing. And I think, what you see here is that we went from a high of almost 700,000 stops back in 2011 to about 13,000 stops last year citywide. That's been the result of a lot of oversight, a lot of training, revisions to policies, working with a court-appointed monitor and advocates to bring that down and to make our people better trained and better equipped to deal with preliminary investigations on the street. And we see that result here. Interestingly, as the number of stops went down, significant felony crime also continued to decline over that same period. So it really demonstrates kind of proof of concept of precision policing, that we don't need to think of policing in terms of geographical areas where crime is occurring, but rather we can focus our resources on the people who, the small number of people who are responsible for most of the crime in the city. A little bit about discipline. So discipline has been very mysterious to a lot of people, and for good reason. For decades, state law has shielded disciplinary records from public view. That is now all changed. So recently the state legislature revised state law. We do have some information about discipline on our website, and there is more coming. We're in the process now of developing some dashboards with more information that will be coming out in the near future. Back in 2018, we commissioned an independent panel to come in and look at our disciplinary system, and the panel found that overall discipline in the department was robust and fair. However, the biggest problem that they found was that it lacked transparency. So nobody really got to see what was going on with regard to discipline. And that also included people inside the department. Police officers often did not know what to expect from the disciplinary system. So, like I said, state law has been revised. We're now in a position where we will be releasing more information. And we've also recently put out draft penalty guidelines. So the independent panel made 13 recommendations for improving our system. We've adopted all of those. One of those was to consider a matrix or disciplinary penalty guidelines. We had a working group that worked on that for over a year. We also collaborated with external stakeholders like the CCRB and the Commission to Combat Police Corruption on that. So that was recently posted online. It was online for 30 days, and we invited public comment. And we received comments online. We also received papers submitted from different organizations. We're in the process now of going through all of that. We will be making some revisions to the draft guidelines, and we expect to have those guidelines published by January. I mentioned dashboards, so these are just two examples of online dashboards. For many years, we have published data on our website. Unfortunately, the data generally has been in Excel tables, so while it may be good for researchers to download that data and use it, for the average person going online looking to learn about the police department, it wasn't very user-friendly. So we have two new dashboards up and running. One of them will allow you to navigate and learn about hate crimes in the city. Another one is about the demographics of the police officers in the police department, so you can learn more about who we are and how the department is staffed. We also have CompStat 2.0, which is a way to go online and look at crime information. And we have more dashboards in development, including one on discipline, and those will be up and available in the coming months. It's not changing. Here we go. Thank you. I'm sure many of you are aware the NYPD has issued body cameras to all of our police officers on patrol. We began this process in the spring of 2017, and currently we have over 25,000 police officers equipped with body cameras citywide. That process of rolling out body cameras took about 2 years, and since inception we have now recorded over 13 million interactions between police and public, and we're adding about 130,000 new videos each week. Body cameras have been proven to be very, very effective in terms of resolving complaints. We use them for investigations. We also use them for supervisors to review the actions of their officers. And then finally, I just want to talk about the internal engagement that we do with our employees and the health and wellness of our employees. So, we cannot serve the public effectively if we're not also tending to the needs of our people. So we've been engaging with our people internally, and one way we've done that recently is with employee race forums. We've been engaging with our people to get their feedback on how we can address issues like race and law enforcement and social justice within the department, making the department more inclusive and more equitable, and how we can work better towards the public. And we've also developed programs to support our members. As you can imagine, police work can be very, very stressful. So to make sure we have programs in place to provide resources for our people to deal with that and be more effective. And at this point, I will turn it back over to Chief Holmes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Quintella. Before turning it over to our gracious facilitator, Camilla, I would like to mention, even if your question is not selected by the facilitator, all questions, answers, and comments will be cataloged and considered in developing the reform plan. In addition, everyone will be asked to fill out the online survey, in addition to submitting questions and comments for discussion or consideration. So without further ado, Ms. Camilla Hanks.
Good evening. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chief Dermot Shea, and welcome to the Police Reform Reinvention Collaborative Listening Session. I'd like to thank you all for coming here today. If you can, let people know that we're online. We're accepting questions online. And without further ado, I'm going to start and ask the first question. We know that NYPD is made up of nearly 50% minorities. That being said, the 121 precinct and the 120 precinct, which patrol minority neighborhoods, have very few people of color as beat cops and detectives. How do we move officers of color to make policing neighborhoods easier? Is the NYPD doing anything to address this issue?
Hi, can you please repeat the question again, Camilla?
I'm sorry. So I think the question is, how are we going to get more minorities to join the police force? How can we have officers of color be in communities of color? And what is the NYPD doing to address this? This is one of the questions that come up quite a bit.
Yes. So I think I'm a recruitment force myself, since I have about 16 family members that are currently employed by the New York City Police Department. What we are doing is we want to increase, like I said earlier, that Commissioner Shea, under his leadership, we're now focused on the youth and establishing dialogue with them. We've increased our communications as far as speaking to children, whether it's, I've done a couple of forums myself via Zoom under the circumstances, unfortunately, that we're met with. A lot of the plans that we had in place as far as the youth coordinating officer and the creation of certain facilities like Saturday Night Live, our PAL center that we have in Brooklyn that just recently launched at 127 Penn. These were locations that we planned on being at and being able to communicate with the youth in the community as far as recruitment is concerned. Now, pretty much what we can do is they can go to our website, New York City Recruit, and if they would like to apply, they can apply on that website, at that website, and then we'll move forward from there.
Thank you. Next question is a long one. I think it is vital for officers in the academy to take psychological and sociological classes to learn the importance of dealing with different demographics. Officers should collaborate with community organizations and communities of color to create community circles as well as sustainability for youth programs. What is NYPD doing to address these issues? It's not really a question, but.
We had an issue with the mic on the first one. So I'll roll those two questions together, and I'll just touch a little bit of topics on the first question. When you look at the police department in New York City currently, it's over 50% when you look at our membership, and has been changing for years in a positive way to be more reflective of the city in general. It's over 50% minority now, currently, the uniformed force of the NYPD. So we take that as a positive. When you look at my day today, a couple hours ago, I was on a Zoom conference with people across the country and internally. How do we combat hate crimes in the Asian community? Snapshot. Last Friday night, I was at a Sikh temple in Queens with members of a fraternal organization on the NYPD. How do we recognize the various talents of different members of the NYPD? And how do we broker relationships with them? Because there is no doubt within New York City there is different communities, different cultural situations where sometimes people are not comfortable coming forward to the police department. We recognize this, and we're constantly trying to assess it. I can tell you that Chief Pontillo that spoke earlier, and I and many others on the executive staff have had conversations about how do we increase and diversify even further. Juanita just talked about a couple things that we are doing and continue to do, and it's been a challenging year, no doubt this year, but that doesn't mean that we're stopping. So everything from engaging with our youth, talking to our clergy across this city of every faith. When you talk about within the police department, we have explorers that hopefully then become cadets, where they can come onto the police department. They can go to college and get reimbursed, and then hopefully come into our academy. So these are just some of the things that we're doing. But as I said before, we are reflective of the city, this great city that we are in, but we are not satisfied by any stretch of the imagination. And there are certain segments. We're here to be honest, and we're here to have hard discussions. African American males, in particular, we are struggling with getting them on this police department. When you look at the police department right now, in terms of the executive team and right down through the ranks, I challenge everyone. What can you do? And I challenge everyone watching on TV right now or here in this auditorium. This is not, I don't believe, a Dermot Shea problem. I think this is an all of us problem in terms of how do we reach people across this city. And this needs to be interwoven really into every single thing that we do as a police department. How we fight crime, how we do outreach, how Juanita behind me in community partnerships builds bridges, how Jeff Madry goes out as our Chief of Community Affairs and makes relationships across this city. And it's not always easy to measure, but it's one relationship at a time. And it's also driven to what we're talking about today, and I'm sure you're going to hear from Arva at some point tonight, in terms of how do the policies of the NYPD affect these relationships? Are we pushing people away, or are we opening up our arms and say, come into our precincts? So I can assure you that everything that we do across the NYPD starts with keeping people safe, but it's how we keep people safe. And it's building relationships, it's policies and practices that we put into place, and how do we make this department and this city even better. The police academy that you mentioned, our current recruits have a 6-month police academy where we invite people in from cross-section of New York City, different faiths, everything from different faiths, everything from situations that they may be exposed to in their times on the street, and let's hear from different voices. So we try to strike that right balance. You spoke about the police academy, you talked about psychological screening. We do psychological screening before you become a police officer. But then we put you through a tremendous amount of training, and constantly, Matt talked about when you get out of the academy, we would bring you back for 3 days a year. In recent years, that's up to 10 days. And every one of these decisions that we make as a police department has a cost-benefit analysis. What training do we add? Does that take cops off the street? It's got to be a good training if we're going to really make that hard decision. But every day these things are done, I can tell you. As recently as today, we spoke about a training that I think would be interesting to people here, ABLE. And it's a training that's issued across the country, fairly new, that we're thinking about putting into place right now. And it's about having officers step in when they see something wrong and be that hand on the shoulder of another officer. Have the comfort, have the courage to step in and say, you need to change your behavior. So across the entire academy, across the entire department, there really is no stone left unturned, but we are committed to continuing that, and we're looking to do even more.
Thank you, Commissioner. That would lead me to my next question, and I'm going to just start naming names because we all know everybody here, and you guys are all my colleagues. So the next question is from John Macbeth, which is a great follow-up to what you were just speaking about. With a few exceptions, brass has accepted the concepts of 21st century policing. Thank you, Commissioner, for your courage. There, unfortunately, are still too many rank and file that remain resistant. What is your strategy for converting them, and the culture that changes in the most difficult lift, or what can we do as community members to help expedite the process? We are always, underline, one questionable tragedy away from the undoing of what we have gained. Good question.
Can you repeat the first line?
Oh.
Just the first line.
Okay. With a few exceptions, brass has accepted the concept.
Brass, okay.
Brass.
Yep.
Top brass.
Yes.
Like Top Gun.
Yeah, well, thank you
that's a good question.
for the question and the acknowledgement. We've certainly, myself and Ben Tucker, the first Deputy Commissioner, who's not here tonight, who will be at the next meeting this Friday night, share the same philosophy in terms of policing. And that's pretty simple, that you're hired as a police officer, you're exposed to 6 months in a police academy, but your learning never should end. And training, practices, these are perishable skills. These are things that need to be refreshed. But also, we're not afraid as a department or an organization to try different things. I think when you acknowledge in that question that we have tried many new things, but there are still problems, show me a line of work where that is not true. And I would say we are no different. We are human. We certainly make mistakes, but we come to work every day, and we certainly expect this. And I know I speak for Juanita and the other members of the executive staff here, that we expect a lot of our police officers, men and women that come to work every day. We expect them to uphold the law. We expect them to take care of people and keep people safe, but they have to do it the right way. And in terms of the question of what do we do with some, it starts with leadership. It starts with myself, right on down, and who I surround myself. And I like to think that I've made some pretty good decisions in terms of selections of an executive staff. But you also have to have accountability. And you have to have, Chief Pontillo mentioned a couple years ago, Chief Jimmy O'Neill employed an outside panel of experts to look at the NYPD discipline system. And I think that what they wrote in that blue ribbon panel is worth discussing here. They found that, as Matt said, that overwhelmingly we have a pretty strong, robust discipline system. We know how to correct things when they're wrong. We know how to treat things and escalate them when it requires more discipline. We have a system in place where we actually have a trial commissioner in the NYPD that tries cases when there is serious misconduct. And when those cases, I believe it was about 300 to 400 last year, were brought to a trial, 98% were convicted. That's a pretty good, remarkable record when you think about it. There were numbers of officers fired, and I don't like to speak about officers fired. I certainly don't. It's tragic circumstances, but there are occurrences and times where that is the appropriate discipline to be meted out. I just don't think that we do a very good job of being transparent about it. I don't think we do a good job of telling our story, and we certainly have to do better about that. And it was mentioned on those slides that are going to be available as we move forward, that all of this information is going to be available on our NYPD website, on dashboards, really to increase transparency, but at the same time, not standing here now and not speaking to people at home and saying, we do that already, we're done. We want to know what we can do better, and really look across, not just law enforcement, but across the city for a diversity of opinions and a diversity of across different fields to make sure that we're doing everything possible to gain trust, because we know that trust is gained very slowly, and unfortunately, when you have one of those bad incidents that were mentioned in the question, it's lost very quickly.
Thank you. So my next question is, they didn't put their name. How do you train and manage high stress and high emotional jobs? I guess it's speaking to how we're managing the high stress of police officers and what that means to people in the community, how it translates.
Yeah, thank you. So that is a challenge. Right, police work can be very, very stressful. The encounters that police officers are involved in on a given day can be unpredictable. To try to match that, we do put our recruits under a fair amount of stress in the academy to begin to acclimate them to that. We also teach them critical decision making, how to make good decisions based upon available information, to reassess and to adjust as necessary. Last year we began a program with our firearms requalification training. So every year police officers have to go to the range twice a year to requalify with their service firearms. We changed one of those courses, so instead of just being the typical go to the range and shoot at a target, it's a very, very active course. It's a one-on-one with an instructor and a student, and they have to run and move and take cover and identify targets and make decisions. Some of the targets are good guys, some are bad guys. So it puts them in a very, very fast-paced, stress-filled environment to give them more realistic scenarios. We've also included much more scenario-based training. So we do this with our investigative encounters or stop, question, and frisk training, but also in the recruit school in the academy. We immerse them into situations where they role play. And there are protagonists there who will inject certain events or actions into the scenario, and then they have to react to it. So that's another way we're doing it. Right before COVID hit, we had opened up tactical training centers in each borough. And the idea was we could take a couple of cops off patrol from each precinct, send them to the local borough tac center because it was close. They didn't have to travel all the way to the academy. And then we would do in small groups some hands-on scenario-based exercises with them using simulators. So it was a good way to bring people in for about 2 hours, train them, send them back out, bring 2 more in. And we could do that pretty much 16 hours a day. Now, once COVID hit, we had to stop that training because it's in very, very hands-on in groups in a small closed environment. But we're looking to get that going again once this health crisis passes.
Thank you. I'm going to take one from online. We have Lola Cassidy. She's writing, what about bias training and training in dealing with EDPs, emotionally disturbed persons? Is that the, yes.
Yeah, no, great question. Very, very important topics, things that cops have to deal with on a regular basis. So beginning about 2 years ago, we rolled out a program to teach implicit bias to our members. And over 2 years, we trained about 35,000 members of the NYPD in implicit bias. And the training was structured so that depending upon your rank, you got a different version of the course. So the course was tailored to the NYPD and to our rank structure. So police officers and detectives who deal with the public in a certain capacity received one version of the training. But then supervisors received a different version that dealt with their role as supervisors, and then there was also an executive version to deal with executives on how you manage a large workforce and how you manage police operations, understanding the impact and effects of implicit bias. And then finally, we did a version of the course that included some community, to get their feedback and interact with community in that training. Recently, we cooperated with the University of Cincinnati on a study to measure the effects of the training, and their study showed that more than 70% of the people who took the training said that the training affected the way they thought and raised their awareness and gave them skills to deal with implicit bias going forward. So that was a great sign. That was our expectation going into it. We've now just begun implicit bias training for our civilian members, and we're looking at refresher training for everybody else going forward. And then on crisis intervention, we've trained about 15,000 people in crisis intervention training. It's a 4-day course. We work with health professionals in delivering that training. It's interactive, it's role play and scenario based, and it teaches police officers how to de-escalate and how to deal with somebody who is going through some emotional crisis.
Thank you. So I'm looking at Jason online. How do you deal with the problem of low morale and high retirement rates?
Good evening. Thanks for the question. So low morale is always a challenge. We constantly try to uplift our officers. We remind them why they are here. But really, one of the best ways we can improve officer morale is for them to engage with members of the community, and maybe more importantly, for the community to engage with them, so that they exchange that hello, that they recognize each other for who they are, that they say thank you on occasion. That's all it really takes. Police officers don't take this job expecting to get rich. They know that they're not going to make a lot of money. They do it for the personal satisfaction that they get from a job well done. And having that mutual respect with members of the community, and it is mutual. The police officers need to respect the community, but we need the community to respect their police officers as well. And that goes a long way towards improving officer morale. As far as retirements go, officers retire for a variety of reasons. They're all personal. Some of them are financial. Some of them are driven by the climate if they feel underappreciated. There are other cities around the country that look to steal our officers away because they know that we have the best trained, the best police officers probably in the world, right here in New York City. And so during these tough times, when the entire profession faces a recruitment challenge, there are places that come in and try to lure our officers away to a warmer climate, maybe a little bit better salary, maybe a little bit better retirement package, better working conditions, what have you. There is no simple solution. It's a constant struggle.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This question is from Kevin Walton in the audience. How does the department plan to address the distrust that is evident when it comes to the relationship between youth, especially African American youth, and the police department, especially because youth are aware of the unfair treatment that African American police and African American police officers face within the force? Does anybody want to tackle that relationship question? Basically, how are we going to address the distrust between the young people, especially African American young people, and police officers that are policing their communities?
Right. With events like this, right? Increased dialogue. That's how we're going to address that relationship. With events like this, with increased dialogue with the youth, that's how we're going to address those relationships. Like I spoke about earlier, I know personally I've conducted Zoom conferences during this time of COVID with several youth groups, even as recent as the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, their community partners, Bobby Brown, who's over their Community Affairs Unit. We actually had probably about 20 children from the community and that wanted to ask questions and know about the police and their training and as far as how do they even join the police department. So I just think it's a need for increased dialogue, just a relationship. And moving forward, I think we're going to accomplish that, especially with the youth strategy that's been put in place. We've recently, I believe, 330-something officers have been put into the capacity of a YCO. And that's just basically going to bolster the NCO's model. But they're going to be strictly committed to children in those particular precincts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this next question is from the audience, from Tanisha Franks. When protests started across the country after yet another public murder of an unarmed black man, it was felt in in New York City that we were back at square one. I wonder tonight, on George Floyd's birthday, what the NYPD can tell us about the sustainable, transformative training that has been done with law enforcement agencies and agents to help understand the hashtag Black Lives Matter efforts in NYC and across the city.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And I would take a step back. Clearly this year, when you look back to the last third week of May, and it was a shock to the system, not just certainly in New York City, but across the country. And certainly in law enforcement, it was, I would categorize it as a dark time. And it was a time that turned very quickly in terms of what we have been trying to do in this department. I have almost 30 years with the NYPD, but certainly as an executive with this department since January of 2014. And I've seen a lot of change. I've seen change in how we police this city, how we've taken affirmative steps to change how we police this city. The statistics are statistics, and they were up on the PowerPoints. Everything from negative encounters to arrests to stops to summonses. But that only tells part of the story. It's also about a culture change of, from the top, what we tell our cops to do. And it wasn't anymore about going to an area and summons or make arrests. It was about solve problems and build relationships. So you have to talk about, I think, what have we done recently? It goes back years. It's a fundamental shift of keeping people safe, but doing it in a way that doesn't alienate people. And I think we've done a better job, but I think we have a heck of a lot of work to do. And I think the fact that we're all sitting here tonight is evidence of that. I think discussions like this don't solve the problem, but they're certainly a part of the solution. People coming together, having hard, honest conversations, dialogues. Probably the last parts of the last 6 questions you could tie and wrap into a ball and put a bow on it. What are we doing for kids? Why do we have trouble recruiting? Why do we have a problem with respect at times? And now you tie it into what happened here in May. When you talk about George Floyd, and when you talk about how we looked at it, one of the first things we did is institute race forms in the NYPD. We have an Office of Equity and Inclusion. And it was, I took part in one about a week or 2 ago, and you want to talk about raw, powerful conversations. And this is NYPD employees. You asked a question earlier about how do we recruit more minority members for diversity. Well, I'll tell you, I was on a race forum, and almost every single person on the forum was a person of color. And they were uniform members, they were civilian members, they were fathers, uncles, brothers, grandmothers, and it was raw. And it was a conversation about race. I would say it's always one of the hardest conversations. And this was a conversation, which I haven't said yet, all internal in the NYPD. It shows us how much work we have to do. But at the same time, I do believe, and when I set out on kind of charting this, and there was people a lot smarter than me helping me put these together. And then I started reaching out to some people that I didn't know before. Would you join us on this? I think it's a tremendous opportunity number one. It's a chance to take a heck of a ride to get this right in the greatest city in the world. But it's not going to be easy. And I do believe that people are going to be surprised on both sides of the aisle here, where I certainly don't know what it's like to live on a certain block and be stopped 5 times by the police. But I think that people might be surprised at how much we're already trying to do and how we can get to where we want to go with you. And with you is the key term there. So everything that we are doing across this agency, and we're still making mistakes, again, there's no doubt about that, but everything that we do is focused on bringing New Yorkers together, rich, poor, Brooklyn, Staten Island, the Bronx, every neighborhood. And Kenny, Chief Corey talked a minute ago about morale. We all live in these communities. We all have family in communities, and we all want to come together as one. And I don't think there's any one training really to answer that question, but it is certainly something that we're well aware of. Saw that video in May in Minneapolis, and I've said it publicly, and I think many leaders across law enforcement have too. It was disturbing at its most basic level to not care about human life. And I think it's not one-stop shopping here in terms of training to combat that. It's across the board.
Thank you. This is from Gwen Carr. How can the officers get to know the community in which they are policing if they don't consistently communicate and interact with them and learn about their whole families? I can't really understand the rest, but I think that that is a very good question. That it's like a reoccurring theme in what I'm seeing in like the outputs. What are going to be the actual strategies to embrace and have police officers in communities of color where they're just not passing through?
Right. So that was the goal of the neighborhood coordination officer or neighborhood policing, right, model, which is still in existence. The build-a-block meetings, we've recognized that we're constantly getting the same attendance. The council meetings are the same people all the time attending. Maybe precincts need to do a better job at marketing, or maybe we need to take a look at how these meetings are held. So we're looking at live streaming. There are some things we're looking at, like pop-up meetings, where we have officers in a location they normally aren't, and put a tent out there and have a pop-up meeting in the middle of the day. There are a lot of things that we are revisiting because we realize that we're not reaching the community as a whole. But the neighborhood, the NCO, I should say, neighborhood policing model was designed to keep in mind to keep the same officers in the same area every day. They were given cell phones, numbers were given out. I know the community changes. This is supposed to be residents as well as businesses. So maybe we need to do a better job at that, and I think we've recognized that with build-a-block meetings and plugging into other existing meetings. There are block association meetings, there are tenant association meetings. So maybe that's something we need to do better at, and we will, because those things are currently being looked at.
Thank you. That leads me to my next question by Mike Perry of True to Life. It is extremely important to continue to promote anti-gun violence programs across NYC. The NYC crisis management system needs to be a part of the public safety plans of NYC. What are you doing to make sure that that's happening? Apologies.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the question. And maybe more importantly, Mike, thanks for what you and everybody at True to Life does every night, going out there on the street into these communities and doing whatever you can to help to stop the violence, to end the violence. That's an important model. The violence interrupters are a key part of a community-based violence prevention strategy. It's not all about enforcement. A lot of it has to involve prevention. What is the NYPD doing to ensure it, to expand upon it? I said, we support it. We work closely with the community in combating violence. The people who are here in the room, the people online who've heard me speak before about this. I've said this many times before. This is a collective effort. This isn't something for the police to do by themselves. This takes the whole community coming together, working together, and to combat violence. And whether that's 7 nights of Good Trouble marches that were organized and led by Councilmember Rose through 7 neighborhoods in Staten Island impacted by gun violence, in which community members and police came out and marched against gun violence, whether it's supporting initiatives like True to Life and Violence Interrupters, whether it's faith-based initiatives, whatever it is, there are many, many roads to get there. There is no one answer, and we all need to come together to work at that.
Thank you. Next question.
Before the next question,
Sorry.
allow me to piggyback on that. So the office that I work for now, Collaborative Policing, what we've been discussing, and I think is of importance to that, to add to Chief Corey's response, gun violence is something that needs to be looked at holistically. It is a public health issue. It entails not just policing and not just saying put the guns down. There are housing issues. There are social condition issues. There's educational issues. It's a lot deeper than what we're seeing on the surface. So my office is currently looking to work with a lot of our partners to really take a deeper dive into why these shootings are happening. Something very similar to what we did with opioid addiction. We took a deep dive into that. There's federal funding for that. We have what we call RxStat, where a lot of people are at the table. When you see gun violence or violence period occurring in the same areas with different generations over and over again, the problem is a lot deeper than put down the guns. So I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I agree with that. The next question is from Ronti, who is the Executive Director of the Gerard Carter Center, who's hosting us tonight. Thank you very much. Is training rigorous enough to expose trainees with pre-existing psychological issues? What reinforcement training happens in the police, and how much training is provided for each significant portion of police duties?
So just on training, we think the training that we put police officers through is pretty rigorous, and we're always looking to make it better. Like we talked about earlier, just in the last couple of years with the implicit bias training and crisis intervention training, to make it as meaningful as possible. One thing about training, it's not like a one and done where you go into the police academy, you train for 6 months, and then you go. We view it really as a career-long experience of training and retraining, building, and then strengthening skills. Like the police commissioner said earlier, a lot of the skills, especially physical skills, are perishable if you don't use them all the time. So it's imperative that we make that commitment, and we have, increasing the number of training days every year. Training in the academy, because there are requirements, even before people get into the academy, there's a screening process. So there's a written exam. Of the people who take and pass the written exam, a little more than half never follow up. It could be because they take another job, or perhaps they've taken multiple exams and they end up processing and getting hired on a different one. But of the remainder, we disqualify about half of those applicants on medical background investigation and psychological screening. And then even after somebody comes on the job, once they're in the academy, they're evaluated, and they also have to pass physical fitness tests, and at the end, another medical exam to make sure they remain qualified. So there is a fair amount of rigor in that process, and we do weed some people out. We see some people resign in the police academy because they're not up to the challenge. And ultimately, I think that's a good thing.
Thank you. So this next question is from Yesenia Mata. Trump indicated an increase of ICE raids in sanctuary cities. In the Bronx last week, ICE identified as NYPD and even had a jacket of NYPD. What can I bring back to my immigrant community that the NYPD is not working with ICE?
I'm glad that question was asked. I saw those articles as well. I think there were some assumptions in those articles. I think it's written once and then it's repeated and then it becomes fact, but I do not believe anyone had an NYPD jacket on. But if I'm wrong on that, then I'm wrong, but I don't believe that's the case. It is clearly delineated in council, city council, and law in New York City that we do not participate in immigration enforcement. We have said it publicly a number of times, and I'll say it right here. And the reason is very simple, because everything that we're talking about tonight is about gaining trust, and the quickest way to lose trust is for people to be not comfortable with coming forward to the police. So 100%. Do we participate on task forces with federal agencies? Yes, we do. Do we do immigration enforcement? 100% we do not in the NYPD, and we are forbidden from law from doing it.
Thank you. So this question is from Isaiah, from the Young Leaders. What is NYPD doing to funnel out the bad and corrupt police officers? What does that look like in practice?
You know, if I'm taking out the pad, I'm giving you exact numbers, so I don't want to. I said earlier that I think we can do an awfully better job in terms of transparency, so I'll just tell you a couple statistics here. If I told you that 90% of NYPD police officers, uniform members, don't have a substantiated civilian complaint, would that surprise you? Maybe it would and maybe it wouldn't, but that's a pretty significant number, 90%. It's actually 89%. It moves between 89 and 91%. When you talk further about discipline, if you talk about civilian complaints in general, and we work very closely with the Civilian Complaint Review Board, if I told you that in the last 10 years they've declined in New York City by about 35%, I think that's a positive. There's probably still too many, and I think if I walked around and had a drink of coffee with everyone in this audience, I guarantee you'd have a story of something where somebody did something that they shouldn't have done. But I also have to look at the big picture, and I have to hold people accountable up here, and I have to be aware of what policies and practices are we putting in place to keep our eye on that big picture and to reduce those numbers. And when I see a statistic like they've dropped 35%, I think that's a positive. More work to do. When I look at lawsuits filed against the NYPD since 2014, down 43%. There's reasons for this, and I'm not going to go too into the weeds. When you drop arrests, when you drop other categories of enforcement, it leads to, generally speaking, the lawsuits dropping. But that's a fact, and it's a pretty significant number. And now to this last question. Last year, I referenced this earlier, 339 police officers faced internal department charges in our trial room. We actually have looks like the People's Court. 339 officers faced charges and 98% were found guilty. It's not enough to say that they faced charges. Were they really held accountable? 98% were found guilty. So we have different levels of, if you come into work late, is that discipline? Yeah, it is, but we're not going to waste time on a trial. We'll tell you not to be late again. If you do it a couple times, maybe we'll dock you pay. Maybe we'll make minor violations on you. We have different graduated steps. But these are the serious charges. 98% found guilty. How many were fired last year? And again, I said this earlier. This doesn't bring me joy. In fact, it upsets me because every case is a tragic case and there's families and things involved. But I do not stand for bad cops. And I don't stand for people that tarnish the badge, because I know too many good cops, and I know too many cops that have made the ultimate sacrifice. Last year, 45 cops, uniformed members, and another 25 civilian members were prosecuted and terminated. That's just last year. I can tell you that I personally sit on a board in my conference room with a small number of people, and as those cases make it all the way up, I am the last stop. And when you have cases, whether it's improper stops or cases of domestic violence, or we are human. So you have things that happen on duty. Quite often you have things that happen off duty. There is a process in place where police officers are held accountable. We have to have the trust of the public. We also have to have the trust of the district attorneys, because I can't have police officers that have their own issues and now making arrests and going to court. I'll tell you right now, we're going to lose those cases. So there is a lot of things regarding discipline that we take extremely serious, and we just published, within the last year, Matt, a discipline matrix just to tell the public exactly what we are doing and what are reasonable penalties associated with things that members of my department, that when they do something wrong, what a normal person could expect to be held accountable for, all in an effort to be more transparent.
Thank you. While we're waiting for that, Demetrius, Carolina, is there an awareness of over-policing in specific communities? And to what extent is being done to address this historic reality? In what way will the CMS and NYPD be crisis management system? Thank you. And NYPD be expanded. Thank you. You actually wrote it out.
I think there were two questions there. The second part, did I hear crisis management?
Yes. So.
Yep.
What is being done to address over-policing in specific communities?
Yep.
And what will and how will crisis management system and NYPD be expanded?
Yeah. So Chief Corey talked about the crisis management team and violence interrupters, and they're really throughout all New York City at this point. The only thing I was leaning to jump up there when Juanita and Kenny talked about it. The only thing I would add to what was already said is that, for the first time, I think in our history, we invited the members of the crisis management team, violence interrupters, I think it was across the city, it was definitely in Queens, into a CompStat meeting about a month ago, to open up our books and to say, hey, this is what we're seeing across the city, this is what we're seeing with violence. We know that you have a role to play. We're not saying that we're partners here and we'll share everything, because there is a sense on the crisis management side that they have to maintain credibility too, and they don't want to become agents of the police. But invited into one police plaza, into the CompStat room, and basically said, here's what's happening, here's the violence that's occurring, what can we do together? So I thought that was a real positive. The first part of the question again, Camille?
What are we doing to address over-policing historical in these communities of color?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that this is the story of the last 6 or 7 years. Coming out of the stop, question, and frisk era, coming out of 700,000 to 800,000 stops in a year, coming out of over 400,000 arrests each year in New York City. We have completely changed how we police this city, and we're not done. The number of stops, the number of summonses, the number of arrests have greatly diminished. And here's the key point, and we hit all-time lows in nearly every crime category: gun violence, murders, all-time lows. That was only about 12 to 14 months ago. How did we do it? By working better than ever with prosecutors, having a softer touch on the street, introducing neighborhood policing and build-a-block meetings and everything that we've kind of touched on today. And we showed really the entire country that you can have it all, that you can reduce arrests, summonses, stops, and you can drive down crime. But you have to have the best information We did it through precision policing. We worked closer than ever before. And when we do make those arrests, we need the results. And we got to a pretty good place. Believe it or not, and this is one of the surprises, right now I'm getting hit as often when I go around the city. Sometimes I'm getting hit on now, we want more police interactions. We want more arrests. You're not doing enough. And that's the balance that we're constantly trying to strike in terms of what's the right number of arrests. What about when it's your building? What about the 311 complaints that I'll call Kenny on and say, Kenny, what's going on in this section of Staten Island? Why are the neighborhood residents complaining so much about whatever? You fill in the blank, because you know the blanks as much as me, whether it's gambling, kids hanging out, drinking, smoking, or anything else. So it's everything that we've talked about. It's trying to find solutions to these problems in the best possible manner, but always at the end of the day being responsive to you, because you are who we work for. You are who pays our salary. You are who lives and why we come to work each and every day. So it's not about a number of arrests. Sometimes we need to make more arrests in a particular area. Sometimes we can do it differently and make less arrests or less stops. But it's more about solutions and building a team. And that team shouldn't just be people with a blue uniform and a patch on. It's public and private working together.
Thank you. So while we're asking questions, I want to address the audience, and I also want to address the online, our visitors online. What does safety mean to you? Do you feel safe in your neighborhood? So I just want you to think about some of those questions and how we're going to answer them. And in the meantime, one of the questions that I thought was great, and this is going really back to the recruitment and how we're going to get people involved. Would you eliminate the college credit requirement to improve recruitment in minority communities?
I honestly don't know if that's on the table, but what I can speak to is there was a time that we did eliminate college credits and took job experience. I believe it was 2 years job experience if you were a school safety officer, where you were eligible to be hired by the New York City Police Department. And basically that was because we realized that people have to work, and some people can't do school and work. So anyone in that particular position had the opportunity to become an NYPD police officer. Is that something that we can look into doing in the future? I'm quite sure we can.
Okay, thank you. So this next question is from Marcy Carr from the Pride Center. The NYPD has an LGBTQ advisory panel. I know it as I'm currently the only Staten Island representative. How is NYPD working with this panel to gain the trust of the LGBTQ community in NYC?
I apologize. How are we working to...
With the LGBTQ community in NYC, how is the police department working actively to engage the LGBTQ community? That was the question.
Okay.
Thanks, Marcy. Thanks for coming tonight. It's nice to see you. We work with a lot of different communities in a lot of different ways, and the LGBTQ community is certainly no different. We have our internal communities as well, right? So we have our own fraternal organization, goal, which is made up of primarily officers who identify as LGBTQ. They help us, they inform us, as all different groups do. We reach out to groups. We form these advisory committees like the one that you referred to include them in these conversations, to help them shape our future, to help them, kind of plot out the course forward, as we're trying to do tonight, and why we're trying to include as many different groups as possible in that conversation. Can we do more? Yeah, absolutely we can. With a lot of different groups, that one included. Absolutely. That almost tags onto a question we got before about how do we get the officers to better know the youth, and I think it expanded beyond that right into the whole family. And it really goes down to those personal interactions, to getting to see one another And one way that happens, or an easier way for that to happen, is for members of those communities to take those officers out and introduce them to others in the community. You know what? Take them to a meeting of your organization and introduce them. Take them to the barbershop. Take them to your church, to your synagogue, to wherever it may be. Take them to the basketball court and say, hey, this is Officer Corey, and he's new here, and introduce him around. I'll tell you something, and it's something that a very wise man once told me. It's really hard to hate someone that you're sitting across the table from. And you start to realize that you have a lot more in common than what separates you. And by getting to know each other, that's how we do this. And I look out at the people in the room, and there were about 50 people in this room when we started. That's our limit because of COVID restrictions and social distancing. And I know almost every one of you. And I can say something else. When I got assigned here just shy of 3 years ago, I didn't know any of you. Right? So look how far we've come. Some of you I've met a couple months ago, and I've now had multiple conversations with. And Isaiah, I got to just give you a shout out because I met you five months or so ago, and you've always asked tough questions, and you asked another tough one tonight. So thanks for never disappointing. All right. But I think that's a big part of the way forward, and it really needs to be pushed down. This is great. The Commissioner talking, Chief Holmes talking, me talking. Now we need to get those officers talking, and we need to get them talking one-on-one. And really that's the way it starts, one person at a time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kenny. And just on that point, I've lost track of time this year. It seems like a month or two ago, maybe it was 5 months ago, but I had members of our own fraternal organization, Gay Officers Action League, in my conference room just talking about issues. And it was more internal, but it was also external. You know, they serve as an advisory, almost an unofficial advisory council to me about issues in the external community, but also what's going on in the job. And I'll give you two great examples of how they helped me. Number one, we have a hate crimes task force in the NYPD. And it's not just about LGBTQ issues. It's also, it could be anti-Semitic crime, it could be anti-Asian crime, it could be anti-black crime. But certainly LGBTQ is a major concern there. Who better to serve on the hate crimes task force than a detective that also is a member of GOAL? Check that, we got that. I mean, we are the most diverse police department in so many ways, and that is our strength. Another example how they helped me coming out of that exact meeting. The meeting ended, we had a lot to talk about, follow-ups. One of the things was, you know what, we're going to call you, would you mind? One of the things that we do is we go to the police academy, talk about training again, Matt, and when the recruit class is in there, GOAL goes in for a day and just exposes them to their stories. And talk about a captive audience. And you're talking about diversity cuts both ways. We have an incredibly diverse academy class, but that we have an incredibly diverse academy class. And they come from everywhere, and some of them haven't been exposed to many of the issues that they may see commonplace in New York City. We have detectives in our Gay Officers Action League, no holds barred, telling some really powerful stories in front of a group of 400 to 500 brand new police officers. And you could hear a pin drop in the room. So we tap into whatever can help us within the department. It may be internal. It may be clergy members coming to address a roll call. I mean, I could speak from experience, and very well put, Kenny, but like, oh, how I wish I knew back then what I know now, right? When I was a young cop 30 years ago walking into a precinct. But those experiences and those stories and those, whether it's, you know, a mother that lives on the block coming in to address the roll call, we do all of that. We probably need to do it more. Whether it's clergy members, not coming in to say this is what you're going to experience, coming in to say welcome and thank you for being here, and by the way, this is what you can expect, and let me walk a footpost with you for one night. So all of that is done to some degree, probably in some parts of the city better than others, but it's just one example of how we really tap into the incredible diversity that really is our strength at the same time.
Thank you. So I'm seeing a lot of these comments on Facebook, and I want everybody to kind of focus on, you know, answering some of the questions that were answered today. So while we're waiting for the next question, please let us know, how can the NYPD engage people in their neighborhood, especially the youth? Let's start talking about mental health and what you think that police officers need to be doing to address those issues in our community. So I have another question from Andrew Garfield. In light of the increased violence in the North Shore neighborhoods of the last 5 months, is there a plan to get officers back into the schools and proactively work with teens to reduce the violence and improve relationships?
So violence is troubling.
Yeah.
Violence is troubling everywhere, and to me personally, violence on the North Shore of Staten Island this year is even more troubling. And I think it's more troubling because I realize how unnecessary and pointless it all is, given where we were just 12 months ago, when, as we stand here in the 120, we recorded the lowest number of murders and shootings ever in the history of the precinct, and the precinct has been here for nearly 100 years. That's a tremendous accomplishment. And we did that in a lot of different ways, and a lot of the credit goes to the cops, and at least an equal amount of credit goes to the community and the groups that we've worked with and that we've spoken about. So to see it slide backwards, yeah, that's disturbing. As far as in the schools, we had a great program right here in Staten Island in our schools, Too Good for Drugs. We engaged every 5th, 7th, and 9th grade student in Staten Island, 15,000 students a year. Police officers went in 10 times a year, the same police officers. Those officers were specifically chosen because they work in the same, they work the evening shift in those same neighborhoods where the schools are located. So the kids that they're seeing in the classroom during the day are the same kids that they're now seeing out in the street at night. And they're building those relationships with those kids. And while that program primarily focused around substance abuse and the dangers and steering clear, it also provided a lot more, because it provided those young people with the tools to make better decisions, to tell them that they had options. We had another module we had tacked onto it really in the late winter, early spring. It was going to run through the spring before school got shut down, which was about gang resistance. And it was all done, it was all going to be done with virtual reality. Thank you, sir. Virtual reality glasses, an options program, and they were going to add that on to help them steer clear of violence and more avoid gangs. Unfortunately, a number of factors played into that this year. One, the shutdown. Schools still aren't, 6 months later, schools still aren't fully open. Many of them are remote. And the second one is the current fiscal crisis. With budgetary challenges come priorities. Is there going to be funding available to continue that program right now? Maybe not, but hopefully we can get it started again in the future.
Thank you. Just to let you know that your questions will be taken and answered, even though they may not be answered tonight, but they will be answered. So another food for thought. If you could train the NYPD in one area that's important to you, what would that training program look like? I think that's a good one. And while you think about that, let's look at Irene Spesamonte. Staten Island has had 6 unsolved homicides so far this year, an increase of 3 from the previous year. Murders are also up in Staten Island by 50%. What can you tell Staten Island residents who fear the borough is not safe?
Chief Corey.
So again, obviously, a troubling increase in violence. We have the greatest police officers and detectives in the world, no doubt about it. 2018, Staten Island, 100% homicide clearance rate. Every single homicide was solved in 2018. As we sit here in 2020, we're close on a lot of them. And many of you who've heard me speak before have heard me speak about this. The speed at which we solve cases sometimes is directly related to the amount of support we get from the community. When I have a young man who's murdered following a cookout, and there's 300 people at that cookout, somebody saw what happened. Somebody needs to come forward and help the police. I can say this with complete confidence. All of those homicides this year, there's no mysteries there. We know who's responsible, and we're building cases. Where safety is concerned, people need to feel safe where they live. That's our shared goal at the end of the day. We all want that. We all want to feel safe where we live, where we work, where we play. And the way we get there is to work together.
With that as a follow-up, I wanted to also ask, do you think that there's enough opportunities where NYPD can partner with people in the community? As a follow-up.
Is there enough? We'll always take more. There's never too many different opportunities to partner. We try a lot of different things to reach out to the community, to partner with the community, to engage our young people. Some of them we're successful at. Some of them we're nowhere near as successful as we want to be. But anything that people put together, and I've said this many times, and I know the Commissioner has said similar, and Chief Holmes as well, invite us and we'll be there.
Thank you. So what is your, this is actually a really good food for thought. In the aftermath of critical incidents and people call for justice, what does justice mean to you, and what type of accountability would you like to see for officers? That's a question that you can answer online, or you can put it, put your response in a question card. So one of the next question is, why won't you abolish the gang database?
Why won't we abolish, I'm sorry?
The gang database.
So I think it would be reckless to do that. The reality is that we have a number of gang members in New York City. Unfortunately, that is a reality. I think that the discussion is healthy, and I think it's something that transparency here is critical. We've been criticized about the criminal group database. It's commonly referred to as a gang database. But I would pose to the audience, or to who's asking that, and I've had these debates at the City Council. About 45% of our shootings in New York City every year are gang-related. That number is actually much higher, but I can't tell you how much higher, because we have a number of shootings where we don't know who the intended target is, and we don't know all the facts of the case because of the details of the case and people not wanting to cooperate. But we know it's a significant number, and I'm comfortable in telling you it's more than 50% of the shootings each year in New York City. I also understand the other side of the equation, where we shouldn't have a 13-year-old boy or a 12-year-old boy or a 20-year-old man or woman labeled a gang member, and now that has a negative impact on their life. You could say that about arrests. You could say that about a lot of things. So there's absolutely two sides of the story. I think that the steps that we've taken here in New York City are prudent. I think we have safeguards in place. I can tell you that we absolutely are held accountable in these forums where we go in front of the City Council and testify and have very spirited discussions about this. But at the end of that process, if there was things that we should do now, today, I wouldn't wait for the City Council or any other legislative body to tell me to fix it. I would put practices in place to fix it myself. We have a mechanism in place right now that I feel comfortable with. So it's essentially this. Somebody tells us they're a gang member, we put them in the gang database. And you may say, well, that's insane. Who would ever tell you that? It happens all the time. They put tattoos on their arm. They wear it as a badge of courage. Unfortunately, that's probably a bigger discussion and a bigger failure of society, but that is a fact. When they boast about themselves on social media or have evidence on social media that they're a gang member and things of that nature, we'll put it in. We have a policy in place that's not hidden, We exercise transparency here too, so people can, if you want to know, what does the NYPD consider when they put somebody into this database? We're public about it. We also have a policy, once you go in, you shouldn't be in the gang database for the rest of your life. Who should you take out? And we have a policy on that too. So I'm comfortable right now, but I think it would be negligent of me, and certainly this police department, with the amount of violence and crime that we have, committed by a few people. That's where we've gotten much better in recent years with precision, knowing that it's a small number of people that drive a disproportionate amount of violence, and not knowing who they were would put us really far back.
Thank you. So while we're looking for the next question, some more food for thought. How do you feel about NYPD's role in interacting with people in crisis, especially our mentally ill? I'd love to see your comments and your questions regarding that. Next, we'll hear from, sorry about that. So Isaiah, again, Commissioner Shea, do you support Black Lives Matter as a movement, or do you support Blue Lives Matter?
I would say I support both. I support all people. And I'm certainly aware of the hot button topic that it engenders today, but I don't find those two things at odds whatsoever. You know, my job as police department of this city, and I've said it from day one, is to be the police commissioner of all people in New York City. And I take that job extremely seriously in terms of representing people from one end of this city to the other, doing my part. I'm probably far from perfect at it, but not to alienate anyone. And in terms of whether it's Black Lives Matter, I certainly understand, what they stood for, the moment of time that occurred this year across this country, the groundswell that came up in May. My personal opinion is that we have to do a lot of inward looking in terms of the police department, but I think it's much beyond the police department and law enforcement. And I truly hope that this process, if it's effective and brings us to a better place, is going to really take a look at the bigger issues. Certainly we have things to look at within our agency and the police department, but I think society as a whole, and certainly the city as a whole, can do much better in many ways, and it goes way beyond law enforcement.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Julie, for responding on Facebook. She says, remove NYPD from dealing with mentally ill people. They are law enforcement officers, not social workers. So our next question is, sorry?
Well, that came up to the topic that you were just asking at home, too. A lot of interesting things going on with this. You're right. Police officers are marriage counselors. They're locksmiths at times. They're Superman at times. They're marriage counselors and everything in between. What's the one training you asked a minute ago I wish they could have?
Yep.
Communication. I mean, but some people are amazing and some people learn it as a skill, and not everyone has the same core talent in that area, and it's something that's learned over time. That's the one magic wand. If I wish I could wave it, I could. In terms of people in crisis and emotionally disturbed, this is going to come up a lot, and there's a fierce debate raging right now about, are the police called upon to do too much? Probably. I also think, if we're honest, we're going to have a conversation about why are the police called so often. And sometimes because they are the last rung when many other people just don't know what to do anymore, are frustrated, or quite frankly have failed. There is many moves underway right now in New York City to explore ways to take police out of that. I think that's a good thing to explore. I could tell you that there's a pilot that's may not be underway yet, but it's real close. And think of that world of people in crisis and divide it into three categories. And there's probably one category that we're probably still going to have to go to. They're armed with a knife, they're immediately going to hurt somebody, they're a danger to themselves or others. But there's other groups. If a 12-year-old girl is home with her mother and just upset but in crisis, Does the police have to respond to that job? Maybe not. So we are working with our partners in city agencies right now and trying to put a template out of instances where when somebody calls 911, there'll be training at 911, and there are jobs that the police don't have to go to. As long as it's safe and appropriate, I'm 100% behind it. It'll also free up our police officers in a time when we have diminishing resources. So I think it could be a win-win as long as we do it carefully, slowly, and do it in a manner that keeps everyone safe. I think it's a win.
Thank you very much. Another question or something to think about. What type of transparency would you like to see for disciplinary proceedings? That's something that we'd love to hear from you online and in the audience. At least you want to ask your question online.
We're going to read some of the answers that the audience on Facebook is submitting. Since we promised an active listening session tonight, we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be heard by the leaders in the room. Folks on Facebook are pointing out that there should be more training in communication with people overall. There's been a stated concern that social workers would not be safe in some of the interactions with emotionally disturbed people, that some of our police officers...
Liz, can you use a mic closer?
There's been a stated concern on Facebook that social workers may not be equipped to be safe in physical interactions with emotionally disturbed persons. There's a compliment from a gentleman on Facebook who said this room, virtual and here, is currently filled with Black community members who risk their lives to reduce violence in our community, which I think is reflective of the shared responsibility that you spoke about earlier. Some of the folks on Facebook also want to make it clear that police respond to calls for help. They're not looking to target certain individuals. I think there's a real mix of comments here about how people define safety. And clearly some concern by crime victims about how their attitudes changed as a result of their interactions as crime victims. Camila, why don't you throw out another question while we keep looking for some of the answers to the provocative questions that you posed to the audience earlier.
Yeah, you're reading some of the tame ones, and there's a lot more. We have over 1,500 comments here. People are interacting. So how do you get good cops to do the necessary work and still hold bad cops accountable? What is being done to protect cops from retaliation from fellow officers?
Well, the department has policy and procedure to address retaliation. It has strongly expressed that retaliation is not accepted in the department. In addition to that, the Commissioner spoke earlier about the training that we are looking into called ABLE that will address intervention. Basically, you know, when I think about members of the service, and I know these questions are general questions, the majority of police officers come to work every day to do a good job and go home. But yes, I think this agency is met sometimes with some bad apples, and it's probably a culture, you know, not to turn in your fellow officer, but I can tell you that is something that we strongly disagree with. Intervention is also built into the patrol guide, which is part of our policies and procedures, and I think it's something that we can do a better job at drilling home when it comes to members of the service. And that's why we're looking at different trainings such as ABLE to implement into our training in the academy.
Thank you.
I'll just add to that because that's a big one, and that's going to come up as a recurring theme. You know, if a nurse walks around a hospital and she sees a doctor do something to a patient, is she going to say, "Doctor, you're wrong"? And that was posed to me, that scenario today, coming out of this ABLE training. It's a fairly new concept training, but I am intrigued by it. I think we're absolutely going to explore it. And it's about getting any profession, but certainly from our point of view here, police officers, to change the culture within an organization from the top down that is an acceptable practice. It's one thing to have policies and practices. It's another thing to really have people change the agency, and will they step in? I will tell you there's some encouraging things. You know, Joe Resnick is our Chief of Internal Affairs. It's never good when I talk to Joe. It's always bad. But where do most of our cases come from? It's not from the public. It's from internal. It's from people calling. We have policies in practice where you have to report it, but then we give them the option they can report it anonymously. And there's safeguards to prove that they're the one that called. So police officers do not want corrupt cops. They do not want misconduct. Are there instances where they stand on the sideline and don't engage if there's something that just doesn't look right? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's human nature, and that's what we are of the belief after hearing this, that there's things you can train to that, to make the force better. So it's something that we're actively pursuing, absolutely intrigued by, but it's not to say that police officers are standing by, because, you know, post May and June, I had a meeting on the 8th floor in one police plaza, and it was senior leadership, I would categorize it that way. And people were standing up and saying, giving examples. We need to do better in certain examples of when a police officer or any member of the NYPD does something wrong, whatever rank they are, calling it out, speaking out about it, and taking the appropriate action. So we are committed to that.
Thank you. I think you should stay right there because we have another question that's regarding that from Isaiah. When you talk about telling on your fellow officer when they are wrong, how do you expect officers to do that when the brotherhood and loyalty is the core value of the police?
Yeah, that's really just what I touched on. It's about changing the values and changing the expectations and having no tolerance. I mean, you can have an environment where people rely on each other, but still do the right thing. And I think that that's something that, you know, we have to continue to pursue. We can't have instances. Here is why it is so critical to me. We can't have incidences like we have seen across the country time and again where it doesn't pass the eye test. And what I mean by that is you see it on TV and you say, why did they allow that to happen? Or why didn't somebody step in? We got to change the culture to make sure that people do step in, and it's not something where it is then they are criticized for it, they are rewarded for it.
Thank you. There was one comment on Facebook where they're saying that please take away the requirement for college credits. This is coming in very hot. You know, they're coming in in lightning speed, so sometimes we see a great comment and then it just moves on. So I'm going to ask a question from that's submitted by Michael. How can you implement a prevention and intervention team into the force? Cops shouldn't have to answer every call. They're coming.
So the question there was about prevention and intervention, Chief. It was about whether cops should have to respond to every call. That's been a common theme on the Facebook comments tonight, which is the role that police play in the community. Does the public want police to respond to every call, or should there be other agencies and organizations and local ground level response?
Right. So I agree. There should be, and there are other agencies that respond, right? We have Administration for Children's Services. They respond to complaints all the time, and the police are not involved. Now, if they're met with some challenges, then naturally, a lot of times to conduct that visit, they will call NYPD. When you think about the sheriff department conducting evictions, right, the police are not called. So I do agree, and that speaks to what the commissioner was speaking to earlier when you're thinking about a emotionally disturbed person. If there's nothing there that warrants the response of a police officer, it should be someone that's able to provide the counseling that they need responding to that location.
Okay, thank you.
So we're here to have an honest conversation, right? So I'll have an honest conversation. It's come up recently with the Defund the Police movement and hard decisions that we're having to make. So we have a homeless outreach unit. That was just taken away from the police department. I would argue that that's a good move. I think that there are other agencies that can absolutely step in and fill that void and free the police officers to do different things. But I'll also be honest and say, guess who they call when there's homeless people or a homeless encampment or something else set up? You got it. They call the NYPD. So whether you're talking about peddlers, which was just taken away from the NYPD, but we're still fielding calls on peddlers, or homeless. I was scanning the editorial page of, I think, the Daily News today, and there was a story. I didn't read it. I apologize. It's been a busy day today, but I skimmed it. And I believe the story was about taking the police out of schools. And it might have meant school safety agent or police, but NYPD. That's a valid opinion for somebody to have. Police shouldn't be in the schools. But flip the page because you'll get an alternative position. And this is why we're doing this. What do you think? What's your opinion? Because we got an earlier question tonight, Camille, about, I think if I heard it right, it was about police officers in the schools. And I think the insinuation was we need police officers in the schools to keep the kids safe. But then not everyone shares that opinion. And these are incredibly tough times, especially in this financial situation that we're in right now. I had to get this one story out tonight, though. When you talk about engagement, when you talk about youth, we have a program in Queens. We have many programs that probably many people haven't even heard of. But we have a group of officers in Queens that work with kids in Far Rockaway, kids that need help, kids that don't have opportunities. And they run a football league for these kids. And what do? They partner with the local school. And what did some of the kids learn? Harsh lesson really early on? Oh, you're not going to school? Then you're not being a part of this team. Guess what the kids started doing? I'm not missing school. And the grades went up. That's not a TV show to make you feel good. That's real life happening in New York City right now, run by the New York City Police Department. Projects across this city with kids, engaging them, keeping them out of trouble, changing their lives. And that's exactly the business. That is crime fighting. That's the business that we're in. That's the business that we need to see more of. And we're looking for ideas like that and any other thing. And partners, because it doesn't have to be the police doing it, but we want to be a part of it.
Thank you. Sesame Cess, that's online, you said raise the age. What does that mean? And in the meantime, let me know what you think about quality of life offenses. Talk to us about, what you think about the homeless in New York City and what role should NYPD be playing to address this issue. How could we, together support these folks in need? William Robert Nolan said NYPD is beyond reform, and this is why I don't know what the link says, but Tim Lennon says we're all human, and you show total disrespect towards police and expect them to take it 100%. They talk back to you one at a time, and they complain to the PD, on and on and on. Yeah, so
I feel bad that you think we're beyond reform, but I would say give us a chance, because we are absolutely capable of reform, smart reform. I could have a discussion with you that we've been doing it for a number of years and we're not done yet. But we also are in the business of keeping people safe, and we want to do it all. Raise the age is New York State was one of the few states in the country that held 16-year-olds criminally liable as an adult. A couple years ago, there was a movement. I would support it, but the details are incredibly important here. So 16 years old, you were an adult and you would be prosecuted not in family court, in criminal court. That was the law about, I'm going back 3 years maybe. The law was passed changing that. It was phased in over a number of years, and now it's fully implemented. So now today, as we stand here, if you are 16 years old and 17 years old, you are no longer an adult. You are considered a juvenile, and you'll be prosecuted depending on the crime you do, not in criminal court, but in family court. If you do really serious crimes, really serious, a juvenile could be still prosecuted in family court. But it's really been a momentum shift, a title shift, and all of those 16 and 17-year-olds now got pushed to family court. Is that good? I think it's great. However, there's always a but. We just had a case in Harlem a week or two ago where a 16-year-old boy shot, paralyzed, 24 arrests at the age of 16. So we don't want a 16-year-old kid being judged and put into a criminal system and put on a path where he's never getting off that path. But we also don't want put him into juvenile court and don't have any real system to help him. Whether it's not the NYPD or it's the NYPD, somebody's got to step in, grab that 16-year-old kid and pull him back on the right path and put him with a mentor, put him on a team, put him somewhere where he can be engaged, active, with role models so that we don't have 24 arrests at the age of 16. I hope that we all agree we could do a lot better than that.
Thank you. So, Dawn, she's concerned about the increase of drug use on the island, and she sees more in her neighborhood. She has children, and this is a concern also. She wants to thank you guys for your sacrifice.
I'm still waiting for the answer, Camila. You had the best question earlier. What does safety mean to you?
Yeah.
Because this is your community, this is your city, this is your police department, these are your elected officials that you elect. What does safety mean to you? And you know, this is my world for the last 30 years, but you know, we've seen a lot of different ways to police New York City. Lock them all up. Well, that's going to keep people safe. But there's a downside to that too. So it's a constant, where is the perfection? And, you know, we're in a place right now in New York State where we've moved away from probably one of the lowest incarcerated major cities, period, fact. And New York State as a whole, too, has been trending down for years in terms of incarceration. But then we need successful, with metrics and accountability for when we divert people out of the criminal justice system because they have a drug habit, that we're giving them the best possible chance to succeed. And that is outside the police department's world, and it costs a heck of a lot of money. But the answer right now is not lock people up for low-level amounts of drugs and put them into jail, because on many different levels, I think most of us agree that's not the answer. It's just we got to get to a better place, and it's complicated. And I think Juanita mentioned before the overdoses. You could argue no place in New York City, you know, saw the per capita numbers a couple of years ago that Staten Island did. We certainly have other parts of the city that was horribly, horribly ravaged and still are by overdoses and drug use. This is going to take everyone involved, from nonprofit groups, alternatives to the NYPD. It's going to take the NYPD focusing on people peddling this poison. It's going to take the prosecutors, but it's terrible in so many ways, and I'll leave it at that.
So we have a few minutes left, and you know, these are my colleagues out here, the ones that are remaining, that really believe in this work. We believe in the importance of partnering with NYPD and what it means to our community. So I think one of the last questions is from Demetrius Carolina is, you know, what's the plan? What's next? You know, we've done this before. We've been here many times. We want to see what the plan is for the future. I think we all want the same things, but we also want a commitment to better our communities and a commitment from you guys on this stage. And we appreciate this opportunity to voice our concerns. But I think, the last question is, what are the plans for ongoing police and community dialogue beyond 2021? Is there a 5-year strategic initiative?
There is a hour-by-hour strategic initiative. So the plans are continued communication with our community of New York City. I can't express enough how much dialogue goes on now. And as the Commissioner said earlier, maybe we just don't do a good job at marketing ourselves. I truly believe that, because there's so much good done in this department that we just don't do a good job at marketing it. So we will continue to strive, strengthen community relations, increase dialogue, increase forums for the community's input, which is critical in order for us to improve what it is that we're doing. But it's continuous, it's ongoing. I can't remember who was last put in the position that I'm in now, but one thing I can assure you is that the people that are placed in this position, that the Commissioner has put in this position to move forward and improve on relationships, improve on policing the city, improve on public safety for the community of New York City, is definitely committed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As you heard earlier, I'm Arva Rice, and I have the privilege of serving as President and CEO of the New York Urban League, and I am one of the 3 advisors for this process with Wes Moore, the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, and Jennifer Jones-Austin of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. Yesterday, we had the opportunity to be announced as the advisors for this initiative, and in a press conference, I said at that time that when I first heard that this was being established, that I was heartened, that it came from the highest level of government, and that it came from our governor, and that the process required that there would be community conversations that would start with conversations, 8 of them around the city, and then further conversations with community leaders and smaller focus groups where we could hear directly from community stakeholders about ways in which that police could work better and stronger, and we could create a more safe community, as the Commissioner said, with as light a touch as possible. And so I wanted to thank you all for the time that you have spent here today, and I want to especially encourage individuals who weren't fully able to provide their voices and provide their ideas and suggestions to do that and to continue this conversation both online and also in those focus groups that are to follow. This is, as I mentioned at that press conference, this isn't the first time that we've had task forces. This isn't the first time that we've had conversations. New York City is an old city, and our police department is an old police department. But we have a time right now that is different than any other, with the deaths of Breonna Taylor and the death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. We have a moral imperative in order to do this better. And so I and my co-chairs are committed to partnering with the Commissioner. We want to thank him for so much time that he's taken today. I know that it is a unique opportunity to hear directly from him and to hear his feedback and his suggestions, so I do thank him for his time today. But I do want to encourage every single stakeholder to continue this conversation and to provide your feedback and your voice, because we are listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Arva. This brings us to the end of our program, and I'd like to turn it back to Chief Holmes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I first want to thank each and every participant, our dais, our police commissioner, and every member of the community, whether virtually or physically, for your participation. And strongly encourage you to continue the dialogue no matter what forum. I can assure you that this is just phase 1. And thank you so much for your participation, and have a good evening.
Thank you.